Today's flight, like any other, began with the familiar sounds of a busy day at the airport. The rolling of luggage wheels on the concrete, announcements echoing over the PA system, and the rustling of passengers adjusting their seats all blending together into a wordless symphony of movement. But just as the massive iron birds were about to roll down the runway and take to the sky, the passengers on this flight would never forget the fateful moment that would change everything. Lucas, an 8-year-old black boy, sat next to his mother, Rachel, on this flight. For Lucas, this was his first time on a plane, and the excitement in his bright, shining eyes was hard to hide. He rested his head against the window, looking outside and listening to the rumbling of the engines, taking in everything in the air, which felt so new. His mother, Rachel, sat beside him, smiling gently, understanding her son's joy, and feeling warmth in her heart. "We're flying high now. Can you see it? Look at those beautiful clouds." Rachel softly pointed to the fluffy clouds outside the window. Lucas nodded, smiling, then turned to ask his mother endless questions about everything. "Mom, why can airplanes fly? Are those clouds made of cotton?" Lucas's questions came as quickly as the wind, but Rachel only needed to see the joy on his face to feel satisfied. She felt proud that her son was experiencing such a special moment, and today would be a day to remember for both of them. This flight was an event Rachel had planned for many months. As a single mother, she had saved every penny to take Lucas somewhere different, somewhere with fresh air and a break from their everyday life. It wasn't just a trip, it was part of a plan to create memories together and explore the world. This flight would be a beautiful mark in Lucas's memory, and Rachel also felt proud to see her son so excited. They weren't the only passengers on the flight today. Among them were many others, waiting for the plane to take off. One of them was Megan, an experienced flight attendant who had worked with the airline for many years. She wore a serious airline uniform, her hair neatly styled, and had a commanding presence. Megan walked down the aisle, glancing over the passengers to see if anyone needed assistance. She kept a stoic expression, as if this was just a task to be completed quickly and efficiently, with no room for laziness or emotion. When Megan passed by Lucas, the boy curiously looked out the window again, leaning towards the aisle as if trying to get a little more space to observe. It was nothing more than a small action that had never caused any inconvenience to anyone, but Megan seemed unable to tolerate it. She stopped immediately, turned back, and looked at Lucas with a cold stare. "Sit up straight, young man," Megan said, her voice cold and accusatory. Her words were so sharp that a few passengers around them turned to look. Lucas was surprised, quickly sitting up straight. He didn't understand why his harmless action had made the flight attendant so angry. He was just curious about everything around him. But Rachel, his mother, immediately realized that her son hadn't done anything wrong. It was just a child's excitement and curiosity. She quickly spoke up to explain, her voice gentle but firm. "Sorry, but my son is just really excited because this is his first flight." Megan looked at Rachel with an unfriendly gaze. "This isn't a playground. He needs to follow the rules," Megan replied, her tone cold and strong, making those around them glance at each other in confusion. Some passengers exchanged looks, as if they were unsure of what was happening. Megan's words sounded like she was teaching a lesson to a child. Meanwhile, Rachel felt both embarrassed and uncomfortable. Lucas looked up at his mother, his big eyes filled with confusion. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" he asked softly and innocently. Rachel's heart ached seeing the sadness in her son's eyes. She hugged him and whispered, "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong." But inside, she felt a growing sense of injustice, not because of her son's actions, but because of the attitude Megan had directed toward them. Suddenly, a passenger sitting in first class, Dorian Blackwell, a senior executive of the airline, noticed the situation unfolding. Dorian, a man with calm and sharp composure, sensed the tension in the air and decided to act. He couldn't stand by and watch this injustice unfold. Dorian set his documents aside, adjusted his tie gently, then stood up from his seat. His steps were firm and confident, his eyes directed squarely at Megan. Determined to resolve this issue immediately, Dorian Blackwell sat back in his seat, but his mind was far from relaxed. Despite having spoken with Megan, he couldn't shake the tension when thinking about the consequences of this incident. As a senior executive of the airline, he knew this was no small matter. The incident on the flight wasn't just a minor altercation between a flight attendant and a passenger. It was a reminder of the responsibility every employee, from the lowest to the highest position, must face when working in a large organization. In the silent moments following their conversation, Dorian could feel the change in the atmosphere on the plane. The passengers sitting near the area where the incident occurred no longer felt at ease. They still glanced over at Megan, some showing clear support for what he had done, others silently observing, but no one could hide the subtle shift in their mindset. Actions, whether accidental or intentional, could have a large impact in such a public setting. Both Megan and Dorian were aware that this couldn't just end with a brief exchange and an apology. An internal investigation needed to be conducted, and that action wasn't just to verify the facts, but to reshape the core values the airline was striving to uphold. Dorian looked at his phone and began typing a message to the HR department, requesting them to be ready for an investigation as soon as the plane landed. He didn't just want to resolve Megan's personal issue, but also to conduct a thorough review of the entire flight attendant team, to ensure this wasn't an isolated incident. As the plane began its descent, the mood in the cabin grew heavier. The passengers around them said nothing, but their eyes remained fixed on Megan. Dorian, from his position, noticed that she seemed to have changed. She was no longer the energetic, confident, and commanding flight attendant he had seen before. Instead, Megan looked tired and worn out, her eyes empty, her posture stiff, as if burdened by a great weight. To Dorian, this was a sign that she had realized her mistake. However, he knew that the realization she had wasn't enough to fully change what had happened. When the plane landed, passengers began to gather their belongings and leave their seats. During this time, Dorian contacted one of his colleagues in HR and requested their presence as soon as the plane landed. He couldn't wait until he returned to the office to address this issue. Everything had to be handled immediately. He believed that if no action was taken right away, this incident would leave an indelible negative mark on both passengers and staff in the future. Dorian stood up from his seat and didn't look at Megan again. He knew that every action he took had an impact, and this time, he didn't want any misunderstandings. As he walked down the first-class aisle, the passengers who had been sitting there couldn't help but look at him with admiration and appreciation. These people, though they hadn't directly witnessed everything, could sense that Dorian had done the right thing. He had stood by his principles, protecting the core values that the airline had always upheld. As the plane completed its landing procedures, Dorian didn't immediately leave but stood for a moment, observing Megan. He knew that she would need time to process everything, but he also understood that not everyone in the company had the courage to face their mistakes. Dorian continued sending messages to HR, requesting an immediate meeting and preparing all necessary information to address the issue. Megan remained standing in the galley, where she had been since everything began. She didn't dare look anyone in the eye, even as passengers passed by. She simply looked down at the floor. But in that moment, Megan knew there was no way to turn back. She couldn't fix what had happened with just an apology. She knew she would have to face the consequences, and this time, there was no avoiding it. After all the passengers had disembarked, Dorian approached HR, where they had prepared to handle the situation. He sat down with his colleagues and began guiding them through the next steps. He explained in detail what had happened, emphasizing that it wasn't just a minor issue, but something bigger, related to workplace behavior. Dorian couldn't let everything be resolved with a simple form of handling. He requested a comprehensive review and training program for all staff, especially flight attendants. to help them better understand their roles and responsibilities toward passengers. After the meeting, Dorian felt somewhat relieved. However, he couldn't forget the heavy feeling he had when he saw Megan standing there, quietly accepting the consequences of her actions. He didn't want her to be ostracized or fired immediately. He wanted her to have the opportunity to learn and grow from her mistake. But if she couldn't change, then her career wouldn't have a place in an organization like this. Meanwhile, Megan was sitting in the HR room, facing a series of questions from the airline's leaders. She felt as if she were being tried, but she also realized that she couldn't hide from what she had done. Every question felt like a blow to her self-esteem. But this was what she had to face if she wanted to regain respect in her job. Dorian returned to his office and began writing a summary report on the incident. He not only wanted to record what had happened, but also to outline the steps the airline needed to take to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. He knew that if there weren't strong changes made now, everything would just continue to repeat itself. Dorian Blackwell sat back in his seat, but his mind was far from relaxed. Despite having spoken with Megan, he couldn't shake the tension when thinking about the consequences of this incident. As a senior executive of the airline, he knew this was no small matter. The incident on the flight wasn't just a minor altercation between a flight attendant and a passenger. It was a reminder of the responsibility every employee, from the lowest to the highest position, must face when working in a large organization. In the silent moments following their conversation, Dorian could feel the change in the atmosphere on the plane. The passengers sitting near the area where the incident occurred no longer felt at ease. They still glanced over at Megan, some showing clear support for what he had done, others silently observing, but no one could hide the subtle shift in their mindset. Actions, whether accidental or intentional, could have a large impact in such a public setting. Both Megan and Dorian were aware that this couldn't just end with a brief exchange and an apology. An internal investigation needed to be conducted, and that action wasn't just to verify the facts, but to reshape the core values the airline was striving to uphold. Dorian looked at his phone and began typing a message to the HR department, requesting them to be ready for an investigation as soon as the plane landed. He didn't just want to resolve Megan's personal issue, but also to conduct a thorough review of the entire flight attendant team to ensure this wasn't an isolated incident. As the plane began its descent, the mood in the cabin grew heavier. The passengers around them said nothing, but their eyes remained fixed on Megan. Dorian, from his position, noticed that she seemed to have changed. She was no longer the energetic, confident, and commanding flight attendant he had seen before. Instead, Megan looked tired and worn out, her eyes empty, her posture stiff, as if burdened by a great weight. To Dorian, this was a sign that she had realized her mistake. However, he knew that the realization she had wasn't enough to fully change what had happened. When the plane landed, passengers began to gather their belongings and leave their seats. During this time, Dorian contacted one of his colleagues in HR and requested their presence as soon as the plane landed. He couldn't wait until he returned to the office to address this issue. Everything had to be handled immediately. He believed that if no action was taken right away, this incident would leave an indelible negative mark on both passengers and staff in the future. Dorian stood up from his seat and didn't look at Megan again. He knew that every action he took had an impact, and this time, he didn't want any misunderstandings. As he walked down the first-class aisle, the passengers who had been sitting there couldn't help but look at him with admiration and appreciation. These people, though they hadn't directly witnessed everything, could sense that Dorian had done the right thing. He had stood by his principles, protecting the core values that the airline had always upheld. As the plane completed its landing procedures, Dorian didn't immediately leave but stood for a moment, observing Megan. He knew that she would need time to process everything, but he also understood that not everyone in the company had the courage to face their mistakes. Dorian continued sending messages to HR, requesting an immediate meeting and preparing all necessary information to address the issue. Megan remained standing in the galley, where she had been since everything began. She didn't dare look anyone in the eye, even as passengers passed by. She simply looked down at the floor. But in that moment, Megan knew there was no way to turn back. She couldn't fix what had happened with just an apology. She knew she would have to face the consequences, and this time, there was no avoiding it. After all the passengers had disembarked, Dorian approached HR, where they had prepared to handle the situation. He sat down with his colleagues and began guiding them through the next steps. He explained in detail what had happened, emphasizing that it wasn't just a minor issue, but something bigger, related to workplace behavior. Dorian couldn't let everything be resolved with a simple form of handling. He requested a comprehensive review and training program for all staff, especially flight attendants, to help them better understand their roles and responsibilities toward passengers. After the meeting, Dorian felt somewhat relieved. However, he couldn't forget the heavy feeling he had when he saw Megan standing there, quietly accepting the consequences of her actions. He didn't want her to be ostracized or fired immediately. He wanted her to have the opportunity to learn and grow from her mistake. But if she couldn't change, then her career wouldn't have a place in an organization like this. Meanwhile, Megan was sitting in the HR room, facing a series of questions from the airline's leaders. She felt as if she were being tried, but she also realized that she couldn't hide from what she had done. Every question felt like a blow to her self-esteem. But this was what she had to face if she wanted to regain respect in her job. Dorian returned to his office and began writing a summary report on the incident. He not only wanted to record what had happened, but also to outline the steps the airline needed to take to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. He knew that if there weren't strong changes made now, everything would just continue to repeat itself. The tense hours that followed saw Dorian Blackwell continuing to monitor the situation, not just regarding Megan, but also the entire airline crew. After the meeting with HR, he realized that the incident on the flight couldn't simply be resolved with a meeting or a warning. It was a warning sign for the entire organization, especially about how the core values of the airline had been overlooked. Dorian was not one to make hasty decisions. Every action of his had to be thought through carefully, and this time, he felt that this crisis was an opportunity for a significant change in the way the company operated. He walked into his office, closed the door, and began drafting a detailed report on the incident. But in his mind, one big question remained. Was this the only chance to bring about real change? Or would everything just be handled and forgotten like so many other incidents? As Dorian sat down at his desk, the first words on his computer screen weren't a report for his superiors, but a personal memo to himself. The company needs to handle this issue not as a what-I'm event, he thought. We need to change the way the entire team works, understand, and implement the core values. He looked back at the HR report on Megan. The information revealed that this wasn't the first time she had been criticized for unprofessional behavior. Complaints about her attitude and conduct had surfaced before, though those instances had only resulted in minor warnings. But this time, it was different. This was a public incident that could not be ignored. Dorian knew that if he didn't act decisively, all the efforts the airline had built would collapse. Outside the office window, the afternoon sunlight was beginning to fade, and the city continued its bustling rhythm. Dorian looked out the window, but his mind remained focused on the events that had just occurred. The airline had once prided itself on its customer service, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had let a flaw in the system silently erode all those values. While Dorian wrestled with his thoughts and decisions, Megan was still sitting in HR, facing an official internal investigation. She could feel the tension in the air as each question from the leadership pierced her self-respect. What had she done wrong? She couldn't deny that she had made a mistake. But when looking at the reactions from the passengers and Dorian, she couldn't help but wonder if she could change. Megan felt as though everything was slipping away from her, no matter how she tried to explain. Her actions had clearly caused dissatisfaction from both the passengers and from someone she hadn't expected. Dorian Blackwell. Having worked in the airline industry for many years, Megan understood that her career could be taken away because of a thoughtless action. But she also knew that her career wasn't just about following rules and asserting power, sometimes forgetting the human element. Finally, after hours of reflection, Megan decided not to make excuses for herself anymore. She knew she was wrong, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. But in that moment, a thought crossed her mind. If she could learn from this mistake, could this be an opportunity for her to change and become a better person in her job? Meanwhile, Dorian had made his final decision. He sent the report to his superiors and requested an urgent meeting with the CEO of the airline. Though he knew this decision would spark mixed reactions, he couldn't continue watching a company he had spent years building allow incidents like this to occur without proper action. When the meeting took place, Dorian began to present the situation to all the senior leaders. He didn't simply conclude Megan's actions. He called on everyone in the room to reconsider the entire training and behavior protocols in the company. As we all know, customer service is at the core of what we do, Dorian said, his eyes locking onto each person in the room. However, I believe that over the years, we've overlooked issues related to the attitude and awareness of our staff. We've allowed small incidents to slip by without timely intervention. The CEO looked at Dorian, his gaze thoughtful. Dorian, I understand what you're saying, but can we make changes immediately without affecting the stability of the company? Dorian smiled lightly, but his expression was serious. We have no choice. If we don't change right away, these small mistakes will become large gaps that will severely harm the company's reputation. We need to restore the trust of both our customers and staff. After a tense exchange, everyone in the meeting realized that this was an opportunity for a major reform in policy and employee training. They all agreed that mandatory training programs for all staff, especially concerning awareness of prejudice and handling difficult situations with passengers, were necessary. The outcome of the meeting was a detailed plan that would be implemented the following week. Regular training sessions would be held, not just for new staff but also for experienced employees like Megan. Dorian also requested the development of a stronger customer feedback system to ensure that any misconduct would be detected and addressed promptly. The decision was made, and Dorian knew that things would never be the same again. While he couldn't change the past, he could ensure that the future of the airline would be different. Megan was notified by HR that she would be suspended from work during the investigation. She wasn't surprised, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on her mind. She understood that this was the consequence she had to bear, but in her heart, a new resolve rose to change, to learn, and to start over. Megan sat in her office, quietly gazing out the window. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass, but it couldn't dispel the gloom in her heart. In these moments, as she faced the decision of being suspended from work, all she could do, long enough for the entire room to realize that the balance of power had shifted. No longer was the CEO questioning a shareholder. Now, a family was putting the company's entire reputation in the spotlight. Jonathan exhaled, giving a slight nod. I will review the internal policies, and I am willing to sign a commitment to reform, with third-party oversight. Malcolm said nothing. He looked at Elena. Elena stared directly at the CEO. I don't need an empty promise. I need a promise with consequences if you don't keep it, and I want it to be made public. Not in some corner of an email, not in a small line at the bottom of your website. I want it to be sent to all passengers. Jonathan watched her intently. He could easily refute another CEO, another shareholder, but sitting before him was a 17-year-old girl, and before the entire nation. She was the victim hurt by his own company. He slowly nodded. I understand. I will personally sign the statement, and I will have it appear on the front page of the airline's website. along with an email sent to all loyal customers. As the door opened, an assistant stepped in, handing Jonathan his phone. He glanced at it, then apologized with a nod, stepping out of the room briefly. The atmosphere lightened almost immediately. Elena looked at her father. "Do you think he's sincere?" Malcolm smirked slightly. "No, but he knows there's no turning back." Elena nodded. She didn't demand sincerity. She demanded accountability. And that was what made those in power wary. The next morning, before the sunlight had a chance to touch the glass skyscrapers, Elena woke up not because of an alarm, but because a barrage of notifications from her phone made the entire bed vibrate. Text messages, missed calls, emails, mentions on social media, and most of all, the headlines on major news outlets. National airline publicly apologizes after discriminating against black student in first class. Malcolm Brooks forces CEO to overhaul airline after racism scandal on flight. One glass of water, one act of discrimination, and the consequences for an entire system. Elena sat on her bed, the thin blanket still draped across her legs. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold but from a strange sensation spreading through her. She was no longer invisible. She opened her phone. Her inbox was overloaded. Among the thousands of responses, some were heartfelt messages of support. "Thank you, Elena. You spoke for thousands of people like me, those who have been treated as though we don't." We can't stop there. We need to create a work environment where every employee fully understands and practices the values this airline holds dear. One of the customer service managers stood up and asked, "So, where do we start, Dorian? What do we need to do right now to improve the situation?" Dorian didn't hesitate to answer. "We need to immediately organize mandatory training on prejudice awareness, emotional intelligence, and communication skills for all flight attendants and staff. This will help them better understand how to treat customers and avoid situations like the one that occurred on the flight." He went on to explain the detailed plan. Each flight attendant must be trained not only in their professional duties, but also in how to handle tense situations, especially when dealing with passengers with special requests. We need to create a friendly and professional work environment where everyone feels respected. The meeting lasted nearly an hour, and afterward, everyone agreed to immediately implement training programs and raise awareness among all employees. Dorian also requested the development of a stronger customer feedback system so that customers could provide feedback on the quality of service. He wanted customers to feel that the airline was always listening and willing to improve. Megan received the notification from HR that she would be suspended from work during the investigation. When she read the message, she wasn't surprised, but a sense of emptiness washed over her. Although she knew she had made a mistake, she couldn't help but feel guilty and disappointed in herself. The next day, Megan decided to attend a training course on prejudice awareness and emotional intelligence. Knowing it would be difficult, she had no other choice but to face her mistake and learn from it. She wrote an email apologizing to Dorian Blackwell and the HR department, expressing her desire to improve herself and contribute to the upcoming training programs. Meanwhile, Dorian felt relieved knowing that everything had been put on the right track. However, he couldn't forget the image of Megan standing silently in HR. He knew this was just the first step in a long and challenging process, but at least he had done something to help the company move forward and change. With the plans now in place, Dorian felt proud of having done the right thing. He believed that change would not happen overnight, but it would certainly come. Every decision in the days ahead would be a step forward towards a fairer and more professional future for everyone in the organization. Megan sat in the training room, the soft light from the overhead neon lights highlighting the stern lines on her face. Deep in thought, she looked at the color chart on the wall, with words like respect, awareness, and emotional intelligence clearly displayed. But to her, these weren't just empty words. This was her final opportunity to face her mistakes and change her life, or at least her career. She never expected that her actions would lead to such a significant change. That thoughtless act, which she had assumed was just a spontaneous reaction, had not only hurt Rachel and her son, but had also plunged her into a professional crisis. The feeling of helplessness in the days following the incident, when she received the suspension notice, was like a storm, sweeping away all her confidence and pride built over the years of her career. But now, sitting in this training room, Megan knew that things could only improve if she truly faced and learned from her mistakes. The training session was held in an open space with round tables and materials laid out on the surface. The other flight attendants, who were attending with her, all seemed tense, each carrying their own burden. Megan wasn't the only one facing challenges like this, but she felt that this journey would be different for her. Each session wasn't just about learning rigid rules, but was a deep dive into human principles and how we affect others in our work. The instructor of the training session, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, began the class with a simple question: how do we truly listen and understand the emotions of others? This question, seemingly simple, left everyone silent for a few seconds. Megan sat quietly, thinking about what she had done earlier. She couldn't deny that she hadn't truly listened to Lucas and his mother. Instead, she had focused on the rules and procedures she thought were correct, ignoring the emotions and human elements behind them. In our work, Sarah continued, it's not just about the rules and procedures we follow, but also about the emotions and experiences of the passengers we need to respect. Sometimes a word that doesn't hurt anyone can turn a memorable moment into an unforgettable memory. The passengers we serve come to us with their own stories. They are not just customers, they are human beings. Megan felt a deep pain invade her mind. These words cut deep into her heart. She hadn't understood that in this job, communication and treating passengers with respect wasn't just a task, but a responsibility to create an environment of understanding and respect. She had let small things like impatience and haste cause her to overlook the most important aspects of her job. After that session, Megan felt as though she had been reborn. Every lesson, every story she heard during the training process made her more aware of her mistakes and how she could change. She not only learned how to communicate with customers, but also how to understand their emotions, how to handle tense situations without causing harm. Megan continued attending other training courses on prejudice awareness and emotional intelligence, and each course was an opportunity for her to truly confront herself. The lessons not only helped her improve her communication skills, but also helped her become more aware of the implicit biases within herself, things she never thought she had. This wasn't easy, and there were moments when she felt stuck as she confronted the darker parts of her personality. One morning, when the course on emotions and empathy ended, Sarah posed another question: how can we change our behavior to truly help others? Megan sat still, thinking about this question. She understood that change doesn't come overnight, and it's not a spur-of-the-moment decision. Change needs to be a continuous process, requiring patience and relentless effort. She decided not to let her mistakes destroy everything. Instead, she would learn from those mistakes to become a better person, not only in her job but in life. The next day, Dorian Blackwell called her into his office. When she walked in, Megan sensed the seriousness in Dorian's eyes. However, instead of criticism, she saw a hint of understanding in his gaze. Dorian invited her to sit down and began the conversation. Megan, I've been following your training process, Dorian began, his voice calm and assured. I've noticed that you've truly made an effort to change. I know this hasn't been an easy process, but I want you to understand that this is an opportunity for you to not only correct your mistake, but also to grow. Megan looked into Dorian's eyes, a feeling of relief and gratitude welling up inside her. She hadn't expected these words from him, but they made her feel acknowledged and recognized. Dorian continued, you've learned valuable lessons from this incident, and I hope you will continue to share those lessons with your colleagues. The company needs employees like you, ones who have the ability to be self-aware and to change. Megan couldn't help but be moved by his words. She knew that being recognized by Dorian wasn't just a step forward in her career. It was the first step on her path to starting over. At the end of the conversation, Dorian smiled gently. "I'll request HR to give you the opportunity to return to work, but I also want you to remember that real change starts with yourself. Keep that spirit alive." Megan left the office with a light heart. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least she had the chance to start over. As she stepped out of the building, she looked up at the sky, feeling a gentle sense of freedom and a renewed trust in the future. Megan's process of change wasn't an end, but a new beginning. She understood that to truly change, it wasn't just about fixing mistakes, but about learning and growing from those experiences. She was ready to become a better flight attendant, not only for the job but for the respect she had for herself and those around her. The next day, Megan stood in front of her office door, feeling her heart pound in her chest. She had been informed that she would be returning to work after a period of suspension. However, today was not like the other times when she would walk into the office with confidence and the familiar ease. This time, she felt a different kind of tension. Each step, each breath she took carried the anxiety of how her colleagues would perceive her, and how she would have to prove herself, not just through words, but through real actions. She was ready to face these challenges. After all the days of learning and reflecting, Megan understood that her return was not just an opportunity to resume her job, but a significant test in her journey of personal change. She could no longer run from her mistakes, but she could prove that she had learned and grown from them. Megan opened her office door and stepped inside. It felt as though all eyes in the office were directed at her. These gazes weren't just curious, but also evaluative. She couldn't help but feel it. But this time, she didn't feel embarrassed or lacking in confidence like before. Instead, she felt a vague sense of inner strength, a strength she hadn't recognized before. She sat down at her desk and began to open the necessary documents. In the quiet atmosphere of the office, she felt that something was changing. This was not just work, but her life. In the past, work had been where she placed all her pride and honor, but now, it had become part of her journey of learning and self-improvement. Dorian Blackwell had texted her before she came to the office today. He had asked her to meet him in his office at the end of the workday. Megan didn't know how to feel about this invitation. She wasn't expecting much from this meeting, but she couldn't deny that it was an opportunity for her to continue on her path of improvement. At the end of the workday, Megan went into Dorian's office. The room still held its usual calm and elegance. Dorian was sitting behind his desk, the light from the desk lamp reflecting on his face, making him look serious. However, when he saw Megan walk in, he smiled gently, and his eyes no longer held the coldness they once had, but a sense of understanding. "Megan, I'm glad to see you back," Dorian began, his voice not harsh or accusatory, but full of gentleness, as though opening the door to a new opportunity. "I know the past weeks haven't been easy for you, but I hope you've been able to learn some important lessons." Megan didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded. But what she felt now wasn't pressure or hesitation, but calm. She sensed that this was her opportunity to truly step into a new chapter of her life. Dorian continued, "You've gone through a long process of learning from your mistakes. The important thing is that you're able to stand up and keep going, not just as a flight attendant, but as someone who knows how to listen, empathize, and change." Megan's heart sank. Dorian's words weren't empty encouragement, but sincere support. These words weren't just recognition for her efforts, but a reminder of the true value of change. "Dorian," Megan began slowly, "I feel like I've been wrong in so many ways, not just with the company, but with myself. But now, I really want to learn and change. I know I can't fix everything, but I want to prove that I can do better." Dorian was silent for a moment before smiling. "Megan, I've seen the change in you, and I believe that change will not only benefit you, but the company as well. You won't just be a flight attendant, you'll be a leader in creating a better work environment. I know you can do it, These words from Dorian sparked a fire within Megan. She felt like she could continue with a new belief in herself. No longer was there self-doubt or hesitation, but a strong determination. "I won't let you down, Dorian. I'll do everything I can to become a better employee, a better person." Dorian nodded, looking at Megan with an expectant gaze. "We can't change everything overnight, but each small step, each small action will make a big difference. I believe you can do it." When Megan left Dorian's office, she felt as though she had just stepped out of a dark door, and in front of her was a bright path. Change, whether big or small, is never easy. But Megan had realized that it was the failures and challenges that would help her grow. She no longer feared or worried about the mistakes of the past. She understood that she would continue to make mistakes, but what mattered was getting up and learning from them. She wouldn't let those mistakes define her life. Instead, she would let change and growth be what spoke for everything. Megan walked out of the company that evening, the sky darkening, but her heart shining with new hope. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face every challenge. She was no longer the person she once was, and now, she truly realized that change wasn't just about fixing mistakes, but about understanding the value of growth and learning. As Megan walked, she no longer felt like a solitary figure. She knew she could change, and that change had already begun with her first step. Megan had returned to work, but she was no longer just an ordinary flight attendant. Now, she clearly felt that every step she took had to be linked to real change, not only in her work, but also in how she treated herself and those around her. After weeks of training, reflection, and self-assessment, she was no longer someone who just followed procedures. She had become someone ready to listen, understand, and be willing to change. The company had made significant progress in improving customer service, and Dorian Blackwell, someone she had always respected, had been a major driving force behind this change. The training programs on prejudice awareness, emotional intelligence, and communication skills had not only helped her, but also the entire team of flight attendants at the airline to reconsider their role in creating a fair and respectful work environment. But even though these steps were evident, Megan knew that real change wasn't easy, and it couldn't be perfected overnight. Each day, she had to work tirelessly to prove to herself and to others that she could do better, that she deserved a second chance. One morning, as Megan was preparing for a new flight, she received a message from Dorian Blackwell. He wanted to meet with her before the flight took off. Megan didn't know how to feel about this meeting. Dorian wasn't the type to interfere with her work. But this time, she felt a little nervous. Could this be the final test he had for her? Or was it a new opportunity to prove that she had truly changed? When Megan walked into Dorian's office, he looked up and smiled, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. Looking directly at her, "Megan," Dorian began, "I want to talk to you about an important issue." Megan felt her heart race, but she tried to remain calm, sitting down and waiting. "We just completed a survey on customer satisfaction with our airline services," Dorian continued, his voice deep and resolute. "I want you to be part of the team that will develop new initiatives to improve the customer experience. What you've learned in your training about emotional intelligence and prejudice awareness will be crucial for these initiatives." Megan was surprised and slightly taken aback by this offer. She hadn't expected that, after all her mistakes, Dorian would assign her such an important task. This wasn't just recognition for her change, but also a big step for her to prove that she could achieve even greater things. "We want you to join a working group that will come up with new initiatives for communicating with passengers, handling stressful situations, and helping other flight attendants improve their soft skills," Dorian explained further, his eyes showing clear expectation. Megan felt a new responsibility weighing on her. However, her heart was filled with excitement. She realized that this was an opportunity not just to prove that she could change, but also to help other colleagues who might have faced difficulties just like she had before. Dorian smiled when he saw Megan's expression. "I know you can do a great job with this." and I hope you'll help us rebuild the trust of our passengers. This is your opportunity to not only improve yourself, but to help others improve as well." Megan stood up and thanked Dorian sincerely. She knew this was a big challenge, but also a wonderful opportunity to truly change. "Thank you, Dorian. I won't let you down, and I won't waste these opportunities." With renewed motivation, Megan began working with the new team. She started organizing training sessions, sharing what she had learned and the real-life experiences she had gone through. She told her own story, from the big mistakes she had made to the lessons she had learned. She encouraged her colleagues not to fear failure, but to see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Megan's training sessions didn't just focus on theory, they were hands-on, where everyone could exchange ideas and learn from real situations. The discussions, role-play scenarios, and more all helped the flight attendants understand that their job wasn't just about serving passengers, but also about creating a respectful environment where everyone could feel cared for and supported. Gradually, Megan noticed the change wasn't only coming from herself but also from her colleagues. They became more open, ready to listen and learn. The tense situations that once occurred were now being handled more smoothly and thoughtfully. Passengers also felt the difference, and they began providing positive feedback about the airline's service, which made Megan feel proud. One day, after finishing a training session, Dorian called her into his office. "Megan, I have to say that I'm very impressed with what you've done, not just in your work but in rebuilding trust with your colleagues. You've helped them a lot in changing their perceptions about customer service." Megan was surprised, but her heart was filled with happiness. "Thank you, Dorian. I just want to help others, just like I was helped." Dorian nodded, his gaze gentler than ever. "Well, you've done the most important thing. I want you to continue this work, but this time, I want to assign you a new task. Join a comprehensive survey on customer satisfaction and come up with initiatives to improve even further." Megan felt as though she were standing on a new peak. Not only was it recognition for her efforts, but also a major step in the path she had chosen. She understood that her work wasn't just about what she had accomplished, but about continuing to learn, grow, and help others. Megan left Dorian's office with a light heart, but full of determination. She knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but she was ready to face every challenge. She was no longer the person she used to be, and that was the thing she was most proud of. Time passed, and Megan gradually adapted to the new challenges in her job. She not only felt the change within herself, but also saw a clear improvement in how the entire flight attendant team faced passengers. The training sessions, the lessons learned from her own experiences, had gradually created a different work culture. Every action, every word from the flight attendants was now carefully considered, and passengers could feel the distinct difference. Customer feedback started to be more positive, and Megan felt that her journey of self-discovery had not been in vain. However, on a rainy morning, an unexpected incident occurred, challenging everything that Megan and Dorian had built. A passenger filed a complaint about a situation they were dissatisfied with, and though it initially seemed like just a minor misunderstanding, things began to escalate as information spread internally. Sarah, an experienced flight attendant whom both Megan and Dorian trusted, was criticized for her behavior during a tense situation with a family. According to initial reports, Sarah had handled an incident where a passenger didn't follow safety regulations on the flight. However, many witnesses reported that Sarah displayed a cold, impatient attitude and was even disrespectful toward the passengers, making the situation more serious. Dorian received the report about this incident and wasted no time in deciding to call an emergency meeting with HR and the relevant department heads. Megan was also present at this meeting, although she wasn't directly involved in the incident. She understood that this would be a test for all the efforts she and Dorian had put in over the past months. The meeting started with a tense atmosphere. Reports were presented, and witnesses took turns sharing what they had seen. Megan listened to every word, but inside, a sense of anxiety began to rise. What had happened with Sarah wasn't just a personal incident, it could be a sign of a bigger problem. In the team's work culture, Dorian began the discussion. We've worked hard to build a respectful environment, but this incident shows we still have a lot of work to do. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a sign that some employees still don't truly understand the importance of empathy and patience when dealing with customers. Megan looked around the room. Seeing the worried looks of her colleagues, this was a critical turning point. She knew that if there wasn't decisive action right now, all their efforts would be destroyed. She felt responsible to speak up, not only for her own career, but for the careers of everyone in the company. Everyone. Megan spoke up, her voice filled with determination. We've built a reliable and professional team, but we can't let incidents like this erode everything we've achieved. Sarah has worked with us for a long time, and I believe she didn't intend to hurt the passengers. But we have to realize that if we don't change our approach to handling situations, we will fail. The room fell silent as everyone listened to Megan. Dorian turned to look at her, and a clear respect appeared in his eyes. Megan is right. We can't let one individual undo the work of all of us. Sarah must take responsibility for her actions. But what's more important is that we learn from this incident, to ensure we don't repeat the same mistakes. The meeting went on for a few more hours, and in the end, they decided to launch a thorough investigation into the incident. Sarah would have to face disciplinary decisions, but alongside that, they would also reorganize training sessions so that all employees could learn from this situation. Megan left the meeting with a sense of unfamiliarity. This was the first time she had faced such a serious situation, but she also understood that this was an opportunity for them to continue strengthening the values they had built. What had happened was a wake-up call for everyone, and no matter the outcome, she believed they would learn from it and continue to improve. That evening, Dorian called Megan into his office once again. When she walked in, he was looking at his computer screen, but he looked up and smiled. We must face the truth. An incident like this will have consequences, but I believe we will overcome it, Dorian began, his voice calm. Megan, I want to thank you for your positive contributions in the meeting earlier. You helped us view the problem in a new light, and I think you are an important part of rebuilding this team. Megan felt touched. She hadn't expected praise from Dorian, but it made her realize that her change wasn't only benefiting herself, but also everyone around her. Thank you, Dorian. I just want to help, and I believe this is an opportunity for us to do better together. Dorian smiled. Then keep helping, Megan. I believe we'll overcome this challenge and become a stronger team. The next day, when Sarah returned to work, she could clearly feel the change in how everyone treated her. She felt ashamed, but also knew that this was an opportunity for her to learn and grow from her mistakes. Megan went over to her, gently tapping her shoulder and smiling. We'll get through this together, Megan said, and Sarah looked at her with appreciative eyes. This incident, though painful and difficult, had become an important milestone in the journey of the entire company. Megan and Dorian knew they had passed a major test, but not just with this incident. The steps they took next would lay the foundation for a truly professional and compassionate flight attendant team. With every challenge, every mistake, they got closer to a better future where respect, empathy, and the ability to listen would become the solid foundation for all their actions. As each day passed, Megan could feel the changes within herself. She was no longer the woman she used to be, the one who easily made mistakes and didn't understand the consequences of her actions. After all the training, the honest conversations, and the valuable lessons, she had truly matured. Concepts like respect, empathy, and emotional intelligence were no longer abstract terms, but had become guiding principles in her life, helping her not only work better but also live better. A month had passed since the incident with Sarah. During that time, Megan had worked tirelessly to regain the trust of her colleagues and customers. She participated in meetings, organized experience sharing sessions, and continued contributing to the initiatives that Dorian had started. Gradually, she noticed that not only had she changed, but the entire team of flight attendants had become more friendly, attentive, and ready to handle difficult situations with patience and empathy. Megan knew that these efforts wouldn't immediately bring about comprehensive change, but she believed they were the first small steps toward a major transformation in the way the entire team operated. She could clearly feel that the work environment had become more comfortable, and people no longer felt pressured or fearful when facing tense situations. They had learned to treat each other with understanding and respect. One morning, after completing a flight, Megan received a message from Dorian Blackwell. He wanted to meet with her before the flight took off. Megan wasn't sure how to feel about this meeting. Dorian wasn't the type to intervene in her work, but this time, she felt a little anxious. Was this his final test for her, or was it a new opportunity to prove that she had truly changed? When Megan entered Dorian's office, he looked up and smiled, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. Looking directly at her, "Megan," Dorian began, "I want to talk to you about what we've achieved over the past period." Megan felt an indescribable joy. Although she had heard praise before, this time, Dorian's words truly meant something. She hadn't expected this, but it made her realize that her efforts hadn't been in vain. "Really, we've created a much stronger team, and I think we've all learned a valuable lesson from the recent incident," Dorian continued. "Megan, I want you to do something important next month. We're going to launch a program to reevaluate all flight attendants with new criteria on behavior, communication, and empathy with customers. You will lead this program." Megan couldn't help but be surprised. This was a huge opportunity for her to continue contributing to building a more professional work environment, not just for herself but for all her colleagues. "Thank you, Dorian," Megan said, her voice full of appreciation. "I will do my best to live up to your trust." Dorian smiled, his gaze warm and encouraging. "I know you can do this. This is the next step in creating real change within the organization, and I believe you're the person who can lead this transformation." Megan left Dorian's office, feeling not only proud, but also deeply aware of her responsibility. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She had become a leader, someone helping to change the work environment and helping colleagues understand that this job wasn't just about technical skills, but also about people. The next day, Megan began planning the new training program she would lead. She sat down with the HR team, sharing the goals she wanted to achieve and the topics the program would focus on. She understood that she couldn't do this alone and that she needed the support of everyone. The program wouldn't just be about assessing job performance, but also about giving each employee a chance to reflect on themselves, learn from their mistakes, and become a better version of themselves. Megan's training program was built around lessons in emotional intelligence, prejudice awareness, and effective communication. The sessions would combine theory and practice, with role-play scenarios where everyone could tackle difficult situations and find appropriate solutions. Megan believed that only when people truly understood the emotions and psychology of their customers could they create truly exceptional service. She spent a lot of time preparing for the first training session. The anxiety began to rise within her again. She knew that this was her chance to prove that her changes would not only benefit herself, but also the entire team of flight attendants and customers. On the day of the first training session, Megan stood before her team of flight attendants. She could feel the tension in the air, but she didn't allow herself to back down. This was the moment to show her confidence and everything she had learned over the past period. "We are not just service providers, we are the face of this airline. And if we don't treat our passengers with respect and empathy, we won't be able to make a difference," Megan began, her voice clear and powerful. The sessions went smoothly, with positive feedback from her colleagues. Each person felt that this was not just another simple training, but a chance to change and improve themselves. Megan had truly created a safe space where everyone could share their thoughts and feelings without fear of being judged. The success of the program wasn't just in the results of the training sessions. The bigger change was how each employee in the company began to value empathy and respect. They had learned to listen not just with their ears, but with their hearts. A month later, Dorian called Megan into his office once again. He smiled when he saw her. "Megan, I have to say that what you've done hasn't just changed the company. It's been an inspiration to everyone. You've led us all in the right direction." Megan felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She knew that this journey wasn't the end, but a turning point in her life. And no matter how many challenges lay ahead, she was ready to continue. She was no longer the person who had made mistakes. She was someone who learned, changed, and inspired others. "Megan," Dorian continued, "you've done something wonderful, and I want you to keep helping this team. You are an essential part of this company's growth." Megan smiled, her eyes shining with determination and confidence. "Thank you, Dorian. I'll continue doing my best." That day, Megan walked out of Dorian's office, feeling a sense of freedom and trust in herself. She knew this was just the first step in her long journey, and no matter how rocky the path ahead was, she would never give up. She had truly changed, and now she would help the company reach new heights.